I want to thank you for coming tonight. Am I hearing something that y'all are not? All right. Well, so the goal of these Sunday night Equip services is to take something that we're facing in our culture, in our day and age, and address it from a biblical worldview, to give us handles so that we can have conversations, that we can live upright lives of holiness in a culture that is heading in the opposite direction, right? And so we've tackled a couple of issues in the past few months. We've talked about cultural Christianity. What does it look like to live in a culture that claims the name Christian but doesn't look anything like it? What does it look like to live in a culture that is talking about transgenderism? What does that mean? How do we consider that from a biblical worldview? How do we as Christians love our transgender neighbors? Those are the last couple of talks that we've hit. And if you weren't able to be here for those, please go to our website, find those, listen to those, so that, again, we can be equipped to deal with these things from a biblical worldview. Well, tonight we are going to cover the topic of technology based on a book called The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch. Now, my hope was to have some available outside when you leave, but those did not get here in time. So we'll have some available at our coming services. If you don't already have this book, pick it up with the book table from it's available, or order it on Amazon now because it'll probably be home by the time you get home. Assuming you have Prime, of course, right? But The Tech-Wise Family, it's just this helpful book the subtitle says it, Everyday Steps to Putting Technology in Its Proper Place. So we're going to use this as our premise for tonight about how we can be wise in a world that's obsessed with technology, okay? But before we get into it, I want to hit on a couple of things that tonight is not about, okay? Tonight, my goal is not to tell you that technology is the boogeyman. Sometimes when we as Christians talk about technology, the assumption could be that we desire to be Luddites, that we desire to be people who abstain from technology completely. And actually, Crouch gets into this a little bit. He says, we're not calling anybody to be Amish, but you might have to be more Amish than you already are now, okay? So we're not trying to be Amish. We're not saying technology is the bad guy. It's not the boogeyman. But we want to think wisely about it in our day and age. The other thing that tonight is not about, it's not about how to fight pornography, okay? This is a conversation that we need to have in our church, and we have been having by God's grace. Some of our men recently went through a book called Finally Free by Heath Lambert. It's a great resource, a great book for how to fight pornography, how to help others fight pornography. And so I'd encourage you to pick that up and to have those conversations, but that's not the goal of tonight. That will be part of the product, hopefully, of some of the things that we put in tonight is helping us to fight that fight. That's not the main goal. Tonight is also not about setting screen time limits for our kids. It's not about what apps to use. It's not about how often your kids should use devices. It's not about when you should introduce devices in your home. That's not the scope of tonight either. What I call that strategy is a whack-a-mole strategy, okay? And honestly, it's ineffective. So part of the reason that I'm giving this talk tonight is my professional background is one of technology. Worked for several years in an IT position and did it for a variety of organizations and school districts. And the last job that I had before I went into full-time ministry, I worked at a private school in Kentucky. And while I was working there, I'd been told by one of the teachers that this particular class was known for finding games that were not blocked on our school's internet. And so she said, hey, they come in at this time, they sit down, they get done with their work about this time, and that's when they start playing their games. And I said, okay, so me on my second floor office, them on their first floor classroom, they go into class, and I pull up one of the kids' computers that she said, this guy's kind of the ringleader. And so I pull up his computer screen. On my computer screen, I can see everything that he's doing, okay? And sure enough, he gets done with his schoolwork, and boom, he's right into a game on the internet. And so what I do is I'll say, okay, there's the web address. I take it, I put it into our school's firewall, hit enter, boom. Within 30 seconds, this kid's game is not loading, so he reloads the screen, and it says, hey, Christian Academy has blocked this website. Well, you know what he does? He goes and finds the next gaming website, pulls it up. Within 30 seconds, he is back to gaming, back away from doing his classwork. And so I take that website, I plug it into the firewall, boom. And this goes on for about 5 or 10 minutes. This kid had no shortage of ways to access games when he should be doing classwork. And that's really what a whack-a-mole strategy is like, right? There's always going to be holes in the fence. So if that's our primary goal, if that's our primary focus for dealing with technology is, okay, how can I set up the right fences? How can I make the right blocks? How can I limit things well enough? Then guys, we are losing the battle, okay? So that's not what tonight is about. Tonight, we want to get bigger than that. We want to ask better questions so that when our kids are approached with technology, when we're approached with technology, we know how to deal with it. We know how to deal with it from a biblical standpoint, from a Christian worldview. We know how to deal with technology in a wise, God-honoring way. And so we're going to ask bigger questions than, how do I limit screen time for my kids? Again, these are not bad things. These are things that will be applications throughout what we're trying to do here. That's not the main focus. So, to go through tonight, we're going to hit on three main ideas. First, we're going to look at technology in the plan of God. What is technology's role in what God is doing in the world? That's number one. Number two, we're going to look at technology in our world today. What's our environment look like as far as technology is concerned? What's our contextual environment? What are we dealing with? What are the people who are making technology trying to do to us? What are they trying to do with our devices? What are they trying to use us for? And then lastly, we're going to look at technology in the wise family. And when we get there, we're going to pull some of the principles that Crouch lays out in his book for us to go through. So that's kind of our roadmap for tonight. Now, we won't have time to do question and answer at the end, but I'm available afterwards to answer questions that you guys may have, more specific questions than things we're going to cover during this talk, to help you guys set up filters, to do things like that. I'm happy to help you do those things. But again, we can't start there. That's not where the conversation starts. If it starts there, we're already losing the battle. So, what does technology look like in the plan of God? How does it fit in its proper place within God's design for the world? Well, when we go back to creation, we know that God created everything and he called it good. And then when he gets done, he even goes as far as to call everything very good. Adam and Eve are created to live in this world, and particularly a garden. An untilled garden that Adam is then commanded to keep and care for the garden that he's been placed in. He's commanded to have dominion over the animals and the plants and basically the world. That was his charge, to be God's governor in the world. And so we can think about ways that Adam would use his innate human capacity to fulfill God's command. And we can use our imagination a little bit and say, okay, this probably would have included agricultural efforts, right? To cultivate this garden. This is an untilled, unkept garden that Adam is then commanded to take dominion over. And so he's supposed to take what God has created him to be able to do as the image of God and use that to care for the world that he's been placed in. And so enter technology. But as you and I know, we do not live in a Genesis 1 or 2 world. We live in a Genesis 3 world, where God's design is not lost, it's not gone, but it's tarnished, it's corrupted to the point where sometimes it's unrecognizable. But then these creations that man is able to create to help him in his task, they are affected by the same things that we are. This curse that the world is brought into because of sin, because of Adam and Eve's disobedience and treason against God. So this technology that we can imagine in a Genesis 2 world of like a shovel or a spade that helps him carry out the task that he's been given. This capacity that's extended out of his hands to the world around him, well, that's altered as well. And so this means that the creation of man, particularly technology, whether it's a device in your pocket or whether it's a shovel in your hands, it is not neutral because we are not neutral. Right? If technology is an extension of human capacity, if it's an extension of what we're able to do with our minds and our hands, then the technology we use is not neutral because we are not neutral because of the fall. One Christian author by the name of Mike Cosper puts it this way: sometimes Christians have a tendency to treat technology as though it were neutral. This is not the case. Like all of creation, the technological world bears witness to God's glory and goodness with its undoubted helpfulness, its moments of beauty, and its occasional ability to inspire awe. But also, like all of creation, it bears the stain and destructive power of sin, introducing us to a whole new ways to destroy relationships, disrupt our lives, and distract from the glory we were created to behold. And so what does technology look like in a Genesis 3 world? What does technology look like after the fall? Well, I would say it's a conduit. It's a conduit of either one of two things. It's either a conduit for sin or it's a conduit for God's grace. Right? It's still extending that human capacity, but if our hearts are not neutral, then the technology we use is not neutral. The technology we then create can be used to rob God of glory, to distort the image of God. But this is important that we must remember. We've always got to go back to this, and you're going to hear me harp on this several times tonight. While technology is affected by our sin, it's not the cause of our sin. Sin begins in the heart. But while it doesn't cause our sin, technology oftentimes provides avenues and honestly freeways for our sin to be expressed. I mean, even think about the biblical narrative for a second. What's the first thing that Adam and Eve create with their hands? It's clothes to cover their shame and their nakedness. So their creativity and ingenuity that God had designed them for and the resources that God had provided them with, the first account that we have of them creating something is clearly affected by the fall. Right? They create something to then cover themselves, to hide, to cover, to distort the image of God. And you can think of other accounts in the biblical narrative of things that man is creating, technology that they're achieving, that is then an evidence of this effect of sin. Think about the Tower of Babel. This is a marvel at the time of technological achievement where man comes together and aspires to go into the heavens like God. But honestly, what is a marvel of technological achievement in reality is a shrine to the pride of humanity. And again, the tower isn't the problem. It's the hearts of the people being expressed through their technology. But for all the bad news about technology being a conduit for sin, it's also a conduit for God's grace, right? So God takes the creation that Adam and Eve created first, their clothing, and he redeems it. He gives them something better. He gives them clothes made from animal skins as a sign pointing forward to this covering that God would do later in the story. But we see that God provides things in this world for the betterment and honestly pushing back the effects of the fall. God curses the man and the woman. He curses the world that they live in, yet he provides them grace to combat these effects. And we even see this today in our own world, right? In his book, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Tony Reinke, and I would recommend this book to you, says this: the breakdown of sin still affects us today. We have weed in the crops, we have pain in the living room, and we have embarrassment and nakedness. And notice how he's picking up on the language of Genesis 3, of the curse, of difficulty in raising crops, of pain in childbirth, of our nakedness. But think about our world today. Farmers use weed-killing technology to minimize thorns and thistles. Women use pain-suppressing technology in childbirth. Fashion designers use fabric to cover our bodies. See, this technological advancement is the gracious gift of God to help us push back against the fallen creation. And so we see this even in how God is orchestrating this whole story, right? How God uses the technology of man to bring about his purposes. Because whether it's a conduit for sin or a conduit for God's grace, technology is ultimately in the plan of God. The story starts with an untilled, unkept garden that Adam and Eve are commanded to keep. But it doesn't stop there. It continues on, as we've talked about. And then he has this man named Noah build an ark that then saves humanity from destruction. Then he makes him for himself a people. And then he tells his people, make for me a tabernacle. And so he requires craftsmen to make a beautiful tabernacle for the worship of Yahweh. But then he goes one step further. He commissions Solomon to then make a temple for the worship of him. And all the while, men of Israel and prophets are writing these things down, which again is a technological achievement that God is doing, preserving his word for future generations. And even whenever we get to the New Testament, Rome, as we talked about earlier today, they had a piece of technology that was used for nothing else than demeaning the image of God. A piece of technology that's really just two pieces of wood, but they had honed it so it was so effective in its torture. And yet God, in his plan, uses that piece of technology to bring salvation, not just to a people, but to the world. But that's not where the story stops. Apostles and the disciples record those things for us. And then in church history, we have the church gathering these writings and then putting them into a thing that we call the book and we call the Bible. And without technology, even further, we're going to skip ahead 1,500 years, but we wouldn't be here as Protestant Baptists if it wasn't for technology. Gutenberg developed this printing press that fueled the Reformation. And ultimately, all of this is leading to the point where Jesus is building a city. And so, from an untilled garden to a glorious city, God is using technology in his plan. It's not the primary focus of his plan, but it's in his hand to use for his purposes and his will. And this is where we find ourselves. In the middle of Genesis 3, looking to a Revelation 22 hope. That's what we're looking forward to while Genesis 3 still has its bearing on us. So what does it look like for us to operate in this world? What does technology look like in the world today? What is our context? What is our environment? Well, if you listen to the talking heads today of the technologies that we see created, right, you'll hear maybe taglines or slogans like this. We're trying to decrease human suffering. We're trying to provide medicine and drinking water. Maybe we're trying to expand human creativity, giving humans a chance to express themselves in ways that older generations never would have been able to. I mean, we even see that. We're benefiting from that on a weekly basis, right, of technological achievements that we get to benefit from because of God allowing humans to be creative, but taglines of just, we're expanding human creativity. Or, probably more often in our age than others, is connecting human relationships, right? We're seeking to connect humans more than they've ever been connected before. And so these are the stated purposes of technology, but what we don't hear stated, why these technologies receive such investment is because it pads the pockets of the people who are making them. Right? There's motivation beyond these good-sounding slogans to create these technologies. Right? So the purpose of technology is not just to decrease human suffering, not just to expand human creativity, not just to connect human relationships, but then to benefit the people who are making them. And this was true throughout history. But one of the points that Crouch makes in his book, and I certainly agree with, is that in the last few generations, in the course of our lives, something about technology changed. Technology stopped just making life better, and it started making life easy. Technology before required skill, required knowledge. Sometimes it even required risk. But now, the tasks that we set out to do that once required those things, skill, thought, time, risk, knowledge, effort, they're now reduced to a simple press of the button. This is what Crouch calls easy everywhere. We live in a world where there's an app for that is not a slogan we really say anymore, but it's the operating function of our life, right? That if there's something that I have to do, there's a device, there's a software, there's an app, there's an algorithm, there's a virtual assistant that will do it for me. I don't have to remember anything because Google will remember it for me. Right? I kind of want to try this. Okay, Google. Nobody's phones went off. I thought that maybe work. Okay? But you've got those commercials, right? That they're like the Hey Siri commercials that set off your phones. But anyway, everything that we were required to do has now been reduced to easy. Oh, that's easy. Someone or something can do it for me. And don't get me wrong, when technology is put in its proper place at its proper time, it's got wonderful benefits. I mean, we even see this as a church, right? This connection of human interaction that we get to experience and we get to benefit from. We get to talk to missionary partners on the other side of the world. Right? 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when they sent missionaries out, they were not sure if they'd ever hear from them again. And now it's, I got a text from them 5 times this week. Well, I got to see their face on the video last week. So these connections we get to benefit from and experience. But in our haste to let technology do the legwork, my fear is that we've forgotten to count the cost. What did it cost us, more than just dollars and cents, to adapt to a world that has easy everywhere? Well, Crouch makes the point that easy everywhere, this kind of life, requires less wisdom and courage. See, we don't have to make hard decisions. We don't have to have wisdom because we can ask Google for the best recommendations on anything. School, mortgages, life advice. I mean, all of this we're outsourcing to something or someone else. We don't have to have courage because relief from fear, relief from anxiety is as quick as a scroll through social media. Right? Easy everywhere has shaped our lives in innumerable ways. And for most of us, we did not count the cost before we adopted these things. And so technology has made life easy for us, right? Meals are now available at the push of a button. Our cars are, for some of us, maybe in this room, your car might have a driverless feature, right? How many of you have the cars that, you can take your hand off the wheel and it'll keep in the lane, but then it'll beep at you and tell you to put your hand back on, right? Have y'all tried that? Seen if it'll go around the curve? Right? Everything becomes easy for us. Technology has certainly made life easy, but has it made us who we know we ought to be? I want to read a quote from his book real quick about this effect of easy everywhere. He says this: "Let's honestly compare ourselves in the society we currently inhabit with previous generations who did not benefit from modern technology's easy everywhere. Without a doubt, compared to human beings just 1 century ago, we are more globally connected, better informed about many aspects of the world, in certain respects more productive, and thanks to GPS and Google Maps, we are certainly less lost. But are we more patient? Are we more kind? Are we more forgiving? Are we more fearless, committed, and creative? And if we are, how much should technology receive the credit?" I would add one more to this list about losing wisdom and courage. I would argue the other thing that we've lost is our attention. I want to show you a quick clip from the Center for Humane Technology. This is a secular organization that's committed to causing reform within the technological community. These are former tech executives and developers who've recognized the trend of technology, non-Christians who say technology is heading in a dangerous direction. We need to do something about it. And so I want to show you this quick clip of a former social media developer talking to a group of high school students.
Quick show of hands. How many of you ever looked down at your phone or computer and then immediately gotten distracted and forgotten why? Give me a whole hands. I have no interest in your half hands. Most of you and some liars. I always appreciate the liars. That was my job. I was doing UX and notification structures for a small social media company to try to take you out of your world and bring you into mine. Because we were told by our investors that if we could grab and hold your attention for 2 minutes or longer, then we had a valuable company. So many of our decisions were about what really works at grabbing and holding your attention. So, which notifications should we show you first? Which friends should rise higher versus lower in your notifications? How many should we send you a day? Ooh, if we autoplay videos inside of our experience, then you'll spend about 10% longer in our app. Let's do that. And so there are so many decisions on the other side of the screen from a bunch of very smart people, smarter than me, who are very, very good at grabbing and holding human attention. And look, technology is amazing. I'm with this organization, the Center for Humane Technology. Many of us used to work in technology and believe in the power of it. If you were to tell me that we could FaceTime across oceans, if you had this Google Maps tool that I literally can't go anywhere without, I'm walking around like this, getting lost like an idiot without it, in one device, that I have a flashlight, I have a stopwatch, a calculator, a camera, all in my pocket. Every song that's ever been created is in my pocket. Benjamin Franklin would freak out if he saw what we had right now. And I'm not here to tell you technology isn't wonderful, it is. But somewhere along the line here, we seem to have lost our way. And of course, there are so many positives, but I'm going to focus this presentation more on some of the costs of all of this technology in our lives. And about 50% of teens feel addicted to their devices, addicted here measured by couldn't go a day without them. And I'm here because I don't think that's an accident. If we look at something like this, which we're very used to by now, and this is old school, this is Facebook, but they're all pretty much the same in this regard. If we zoom out, what are we saying here? We're saying, hey, someone just took a picture of you and shared it with everybody you know and a whole bunch of people you don't know. Do you want to see it? You don't have to. You don't have to look now. Do you want to see it? Do you want to see that photo? And of course, if you're at a particularly vulnerable socially time in your life where you care a lot what other people are thinking, of course you want to see this photo. Of course you want to see what that says. And the reality is, it's not just click here, it's spend the next 20 minutes because we're so good at holding your attention once we have it. And you could say, you know what, I'm going to turn off all these notifications. I'm not going to let them get me. Boom, I'm gone. But with things like stories, it's so deeply baked in that even if you turned everything off, we have the same situation happening here. Someone mentioned you in their story, but now if you didn't visit every 24 hours, you literally don't get to see what it is, and you can't click that button. So it's very, very hard to put this stuff down. There's a lot of thought and a lot of attention that goes into making it very difficult to put this stuff down. These tools, these phones, they're not neutral. They want something from you, and that something is your attention.
And when we think about it, we recognize the truthfulness of this, right? That the powers that be right now, they want something from us. And by and large, they have it, right? They have our attention. And the thing that this doesn't recognize is, for these companies, our attention is worth dollars and cents, right? You heard him say, if you spend 2 minutes in their app, they've got a valuable company. And our attention is being sold for pennies on the dollar. But we know that our attention is worth far more than that, right? Because where our attention goes, our affections are sure to follow. What has our minds will in time have our hearts. And the reality is we cannot passively use technology because technology is not passively using us. There's intentionality in the things that are created and put in our homes. Have you realized that pretty much any service you sign up for, you can get some sort of Google device for free? Right? Your electric company provides you with Google equipment for free if you'll just sign up for the next year. That's not an accident that Google and Alexa, these things are everywhere. It's in our earbuds, it's in our phones, it's on our counters, it's in our cars, it's in our bathrooms, it's everywhere. Because they know our attention is valuable, but even they undervalue our attention. I want to read this quote by J.C. Ryle that was written in 1886. Think about that for a moment. 1886. I dwell on these things more because this is an age of reading. I wish this were an age of reading. Of making many books, there seems no end, though few of them are really profitable. There seems a rage for cheap printing and publishing. Newspapers of every sort abound, and the tone of some, which have the widest circulation, tell badly for the taste of the age. Amidst the flood of dangerous reading, I plead for my master's book. I call upon you not to forget the book of the soul. Let not newspapers, novels, romances be read. Let not Facebook, Twitter, Instagram be scrolled through, while the prophets and apostles are despised. Let not the exciting and licentious swallow up your attention, while the edifying and the sanctifying can find no place in your mind. I don't know about you, but words like that cut to my heart. Because the reality is, and I think this is true for most of us, we're stuck and we know it. We're in the mud. We recognize this is an issue, and so we've got to have a way out of it. I want to read you the results of a recent survey that was done. Questions were posed to a group of middle school and high school students. It says this: I have an electronic device within reach at all times. 85% answered positively to that question. I use my devices when I know I should be doing something else. 87% answered positively to that question. I feel anxious when I don't know where my device is. 68% answered honest or positively to that question. I know I should use my device less, but I can't seem to stop. 74 answered positively to that question. And I'm here to tell you, folks, this problem is not far from home because this is a survey of our middle school and high school students. Guys, we're stuck and we know it. Your kids recognize this. Your kids recognize this as a problem. So what are we doing about it? What framework are we setting up that's better than just, oh, I'm not going to touch my device for, so often every day? What are we doing about this problem? Well, that's why books like this are so helpful, because we have to ask bigger and better questions. So let's look at what our intentional framework should be. Let's look at technology in the wise family. How do we, who are concerned for our own souls, for the souls of our children, who are concerned for the clarity and visibility of the gospel, how do we chart a path that produces what we desire? How do we get out of the mud that we're stuck in? So you hear this a lot when people go through like Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace University. Well, he's too strict on these things. You can play it a little loose. And I've heard people respond to some of the principles that Crouch lays out in his book in a similar fashion. But I want to challenge you tonight, because I think we all recognize how extensive the problem is. What lengths are we willing to go to really address the problem? Or are we content to have our attention stolen from us for pennies on the dollar? Well, the first thing that a wise family does is they make 3 choices. And again, these are all drawn straight from the book. A wise family makes 3 choices. A pursuit that starts bolstered by the Spirit, encouraged by accountability. We make these hard choices. First, we choose character. We choose the things that matter. We develop wisdom and courage together as a family. And when he talks about family here, he's not just talking about individual families, people that share the same last name or share the same household. He's talking about the church in general. Guys, if we are going to succeed in combating these issues of technology that we face, we have to do it together. And so we have to develop wisdom and courage together as a South Side family. Because the reality is, technology is great at aiding us, but it is terrible at forming us. And to choose character means to base all of our decisions about technology, the big ones and the small ones, the decisions about when to give your kids phones, the decisions about when you can use your phone, the decision about whether you should use this app or whether you should use this device. We have to ask these types of questions first. Will this help me become less foolish and more wise? How many of us ask that question before we go through Netflix? Will this help me become less fearful and more courageous? Is this a form of eating and drinking and using my smartphone for the glory of God? These are the types of questions, and we have to be diligent and disciplined to ask these types of questions on a daily basis. Because the statistics say, I'm gonna totally miss this, so look it up, it's still shocking. But our attention is diverted 278 times an hour to different things. The statistics are incredible on this. And I could inundate you with statistics. So we have to ask these questions 278 times an hour. Is my use of this technology, is my use of this device going to produce in me the character that is becoming of a follower of Christ? We have to choose character. So maybe this is a topic that you handle in your D groups. Maybe this is a topic that you handle in your home groups, to make sure that we are asking these types of questions. The second choice that a wise family makes is they make the choice to shape space. And this is his tagline here. We want to create more than we consume. So we fill the center of our home with things that reward skill and active engagement. In your mind, do a virtual tour like the realtor does of your home, like the 360 tour, right? In your mind, do that now. What purpose do the most visible items in your home serve? Go into the room that you gather the most, where your family spends the most time, where you spend the most time. What are the prominent features of that room? What are the uses of that room? He uses a helpful analogy of a hearth and a furnace. See, a hearth, before there was central heating air, was where people gathered to warm themselves. They would tend the fire, they would keep the fire, a task that took skill and time and risk. But now, sitting wherever we are, we can ask Alexa to turn up the temperature for us, can't we? Right? So I'm not telling you that you need to get rid of your devices. I'm not saying you need to get rid of your central heating air, install a fireplace. I'm not saying you need to get rid of your microwave. I'm not saying you need to get rid of your router or your thermostat. But easy everywhere, these things that don't require skill, we need to push them to the edges of our homes so that they don't receive the attention. Think about where you're charging your phone. Think about how your furniture is situated. Is your furniture situated so that everybody's attention is drawn to the TV or to conversation and each other? Think about where you store books. Think about where you store instruments. Think about where you store board games. Things that create interaction, things that require creativity. I mean, just think about your kids at Christmas, right? What does everybody say about the kids at Christmas with the gifts they like? They like the boxes more than the toys, right? But at some point that changes. That changes to the toys that have the lights. That changes to the toys that move on their own. That changes to the devices that are glowing rectangles. At some point there's a shift, right? So what are we doing so that we're not encouraging that shift for our kids? Maybe this is about the toys that you buy. I'm not trying to set up a legalistic set of structures here for you to abide by, but I'm asking you to ask yourselves, what is the purpose of the things that I'm putting in my home? What is it producing in me? What is it producing in my kids? What is it producing in my family? Is it worth it? Is it producing those things that we asked? Is it producing wisdom? Is it producing courage? Are we able to do it for the glory of God? So we shape space. Third, we structure time. He says this, we are designed for a rhythm of work and rest. So 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, and 1 week a year, we turn off our devices and worship, feast, play, and rest together. Now I know, as soon as I say, turn off your device for an hour a day a week a year, some of you are already saying in your mind, I can't do that. I need to be accessible. I need to be able to be accessible to work and to other people. And so I want to push back on that a little bit and ask, do you really? Do we really need to be accessible at all hours of the day, every day of the week, every week of the year? Because 50 years ago, 20 years ago, we didn't have that expectation for ourselves. But then we've bought the lie of technology that we need access to information at all times. Here's the thing. Information doesn't always mean wisdom. And so what are we structuring our time around? How are we spending our time when we're gathered with our family? Maybe for you, this is right when you get home from work. The phone turns off, and it doesn't turn on until the kids go to bed. Maybe for you, this is Sundays. You turn off the phone. Unless you're a nursery manager, you need your phone on Sunday mornings. But maybe for Sundays, you turn off your phone completely. You spend the afternoon with your family before you go with your home group. Whatever the case may be, look at your family's schedule and ask the hard question, do I really need my phone at this time? Do I really need to be accessible at this time? And why? So if we can't answer that first question, I'll ask a second question. Why do I feel like I need to be accessible at this time? Structure your time. Turn off your phone. An hour a day a week a year. Because the reality is, because technology knows us so well, right? If we don't plan our time for technology, it will steal our time. So those are the three choices that we have to make. And I don't know if you're like me. I'm already thinking about these choices. I've been thinking about these choices as I've been preparing for this. And on my own, I do not have the resolve to complete these. Right? I'm just honest with you guys. I do not have the resolve to make these choices on my own. I need the help of my wife. I need the help of my discipleship relationships within this church to be able to make and stick to these choices. Now, here's some other things that are just practical as far as daily life is concerned. Again, these are all from Crouch's book. So first, we wake up before our devices do, and they go to bed before we do. How many of us, including myself, are on the phone from the moment we wake to the moment we sleep? How many of us, our phones are sitting right by our beds, so it's the first thing that we touch and the last thing that we touch? Time and statistics will tell what that's doing to our brains, but we already know. We already see the effects of what that's doing. How many of us, that has stolen time that we would typically set aside for spiritual disciplines? How many of us, because our device is there, that's stolen intimacy with our spouse? We've got to ask these hard questions. We've got to be willing to make hard choices. And the fact that I'm saying it's a hard choice to charge your phone somewhere else or to turn your phone off an hour before the day, that's just an example of where we are. But these are hard choices, and I'm not trying to say that they're not, right? Second, we aim for no screen before double digits at school and at home. Did you know in Silicon Valley, the tech executives who run these companies of these devices that we have in our pockets, that are in our schools, that are in our cars, they pay bukus of money to send their kids to schools without technology. They do. Steve Jobs was on record of saying that he would never give his kids an iPad. So why are we aiming to put devices in our kids' hands so quickly? Again, time and statistics will tell us the effect that this will have on our kids. So find a time that's right for you. Again, this is not an attempt to be legalistic to say, all right, your kid should never see a screen until they're 10 years old. That when you go to the restaurant that's got the TV, that you've got to cover your kid's eyes the entire time you're in here. Okay? That's not the mindset here. But the mindset is to be intentional about when your kids have access to devices, how you're giving it to them, the conversations that you're having when you're handing that kid that device. And I would just say this, as someone who works with students, does your 13-year-old need that smartphone? Thank you. I would agree. All right? We can talk about security and safety and contact and access, but again, what has changed in the last 10 years that we feel so needed to give our kids these phones that are accesses to any number of things so early at such an undeveloped stage? Right? I've even heard parents today and recently talk about how their kids, who they've made the decision not to give their kid a smartphone before a certain age, how their kids get made fun of at school. Are you preparing your kids to have those conversations, to deal with those issues, to talk about friends who have had smartphones for 7 years at this point? Talk with your spouse, talk with other parents. Find a time where it's appropriate to introduce your kids to these types of things. And I would just say, my aim here would not be to say never give them a smartphone, never introduce them to the world, because we've got to show them what it looks like to live in a world that's inundated with technology. But why are we so eager to do it when they are so young? Next, we use screens for a purpose, and we use them together rather than using them aimlessly and alone. Maybe the question you need to ask is, why am I using my device at this time? I've had situations where I've been at home, I've been on my phone, and I'm just spinning, wasting time, and Graham will walk up to me and he'll say, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" And suddenly I'm filled with shame, right? He probably won't understand if I answer him honestly. Like, I'm just sitting here wasting time on a website called Twitter. Right? But all of a sudden I'm filled with shame because I know I am wasting my time, and I'm wasting time with my son. We use screens for a purpose. Have a stated purpose for when you use your devices. Have a stated purpose that you wouldn't mind telling your kids about. Have a stated purpose that you wouldn't mind telling your spouse about. Have a stated purpose that you wouldn't mind telling your grandma about. And don't use them alone. Maybe for you, this is moving your computer into a space where everybody can see the screen, right? Not in the back bedroom in the corner, but maybe it's in a space that's high traffic so that the screen is facing the world behind you. Make these choices. Use these screens for a purpose. Use them together. Use them with a purpose. Next, car time is conversation time. Car time is conversation time. Can you think of a better time to have conversations when you're with your kids than when they're strapped down? Right? I mean, the dinner table's hard enough because there's enough distractions with food and different things on the table. But car time, they are strapped in their seats. By law, they have to be able to converse with you. So use it. Redeem the time. Don't always put the earbuds in. Don't always let the screens play. I know someone who, and it bugs me to death, and I'm scared to have this conversation with them because I love them enough. I love them a lot, but I probably ought to love them enough to tell them. They've got it so that when the car starts, the screen starts, right? It's just plugged into the outlet. How much time are we wasting when that's our mindset? What are you doing with your car time, and how are you going to redeem it? Next, access. Spouses have one another's passwords, and parents have total access to their children's devices. If we're going to do this rightly, we have to have transparency. And again, I'm not just talking about being able to see potentially explicit material that you might be viewing. I'm talking about your whole digital life laid out so that someone who loves you and cares about you can see it, can help you walk the line. And maybe for you, this is some backtracking that you will have to do. Maybe in some of these, you will have to backtrack. You will have to say maybe to your kids, I gave you access that I shouldn't have given you access to yet. We're going to pull back. Be honest about your failings. Say, I shouldn't have done this. Please forgive me. Include them in these conversations because they're going to be hard conversations. Because again, we've seen 50% of teens feel addicted to their smartphones. Couldn't go a day without them. Right? So maybe some of these conversations are going to be hard. And again, be honest in your conversations. Some parents justify this of saying, I want to give my kids privacy. Here's the reality, folks. When you're online, there is no privacy. Nothing is private online. Doesn't matter what VPN you use, doesn't matter what browser you use, doesn't matter. When you're online, someone has access to your information. And even if they didn't, even if you had the promise of complete security and privacy, all of our deeds are laid before the Lord. There is no such thing as digital privacy. Do not lie to your kids and tell them that. Spouses have access to one another's passwords. Parents, you have access to your children's devices. There's a book not written by a Christian, but it's a helpful book called Viral Parenting that talks through some of these things about like device contracts and how to have these conversations and how to work through some of these things. Again, not a Christian, but some helpful tidbits in a book called Viral Parenting that I would recommend. All right, so these are talking about mindsets that we need to have, but let's talk about things that we need to pursue. And we'll close with these. We need to pursue what matters most. So he gives us these two suggestions. We learn to sing together rather than letting recorded and amplified music take over our lives and worship. His point is that we were created to sing. As God's people, we were created and commanded and compelled to sing, to borrow from the Gettys. So let's learn to sing together. Now, in our home, this might look a little different. We're not very musically talented, and so we use the recordings that are on Spotify and on YouTube of what we sing here at the church to springboard us into singing. So Katie's really good about this. When they're in the car, they'll listen to what we sing here. But when we do family worship, we sing the songs that we sing here, and we've heard them enough that it produces at least some sort of tune within us, maybe not the best tune, but some sort of tune within us that we can sing along on Sunday mornings. So it's not saying you should never listen to recorded and amplified music, okay? But don't let that so take over our lives so that we can't enjoy the benefit of listening to each other sing. I so appreciate the intentionality that we have here on Sunday mornings of not to make the music so loud that we can't hear each other. I like sitting in the back because I get to see you sing, but I like sitting in the front because I get to hear you sing. Let your family hear you sing, for good or for bad. And lastly, we show up in person for the big events of life. We learn how to be human by being fully present in our moments of greatest vulnerability. We hope to die in one another's arms. Now, in this chapter, he talks about these extensive things like going to weddings, going to funerals. I want to take a step back from that and say, are you present for the moment? Not necessarily the big events. That can be the second decision you have to make. But are you present at home? Are you present in the car? Are you present with your spouse when you're having conversations? Or is our attention so diverted that we're never present, not even for the small moments? So push for things that matter most. Push for singing. Push for being present. Push for being honest. Push for being vulnerable. Don't go to your device for solace. Go to your family. Go to the Lord. Practice the spiritual disciplines. Our lives are a vacuum. So if we set today, I'm going to limit my device. I'm going to limit how often I do. But you don't replace it with something will fill the vacuum. So practice the spiritual disciplines. Practice conversation. Practice conversation with your family. And give grace in failure. No matter how resolved you are this week to commit to some of these things, if not all of them, you will fail. Sorry, I know you well enough. But give grace in failure and provide encouragement to resolve to continue. Be honest about our failings. Make hard choices. And any of us in discipleship relationships, whether it's in D groups, whether it's someone else in the church, whether it's us as parents, I like to use this language a lot. We are the pace setters, right? When those that we're discipling observe us, when our kids observe us, what are they seeing that's worth our attention? Because we're showing them something. We're showing what is worth our attention, whether we think about it or not. What are you showing is worth your attention and ultimately your affections? Guys, this is a big issue. This is something that we all have to deal with. We have to make hard choices. And so please use resources like this. Use resources like a practical guide to culture. And I can provide, if you don't get all these, don't feel like you need to write them all down. But I can provide you these titles later. A Practical Guide to Culture by John Stonestreet. 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Tony Reinke. The Next Story by Tim Challies. Plugged In by Daniel Strange. Finally Free by Heath Lambert. These are all great books on these topics that we can set and resolve to commit to do these types of things. There's websites out there. And as we've already seen, websites that come from a secular point of view, but even Christian worldview, there are websites dedicated to help us do these things. Come, ask for resources. We want to equip you to take these steps, to make these hard decisions, and then continue. This is not a New Year's resolution that's abandoned by the next month. These are things that we need to establish for long term, because technology is not going to stop changing. But praise be to God that His Word does not change in a world that is always shifting. So let us run to our Master's book. Let us not despise it while our phones are in our hands.